throughout most of this day, shockingly, we had dry conditions. It was a total 180 from last week racing at Daytona. So that was a nice little breath of fresh air. We got most of this race in. We got all this race in, barring that final caution. But this race was not necessarily too eventful. It was, in my opinion, much better than the first road course race that we ran last year, the 2020 season. But, it's still, look, these cars are very tough to drive, especially on this track. That's what a lot of guys say. But nonetheless, it was a competitive race, but it was dominated by Chase Elliott. He won the first stage, was leading every lap. Denny Hamlin was able to get up there after some cars got shuffled back into the pack. He won stage 2, and then we were able to kind of get back to normal in a sense. Chase Elliott was in the lead, full dominance there, and like I said, we had the rain come in, and the thing about the rain is that it only was coating parts of the track. It was not like it was an impending rainstorm. I mean, I was checking Twitter, I was looking at the radars, and there was really nothing showing significant precipitation near the track or necessarily in the entire state of Florida. I get that these little cells can pop up and whatnot, but I mean, there was nothing of significance that I think the tower should have been worried about. But obviously they had different plans. But now I want to look at this per the NASCAR rulebook. So the NASCAR rulebook states that when the race starts and there's a caution for weather, the NASCAR rulebook states that when the race is started under dry or normal conditions and NASCAR determines conditions are too wet to continue under dry conditioned equipment, NASCAR will illuminate the caution lights and or display the yellow flag at the start-finish line. NASCAR officials will announce the reason for the caution period. This also goes into Section B, where it states that the rear flashing light must be activated on all vehicles during damp or wet weather conditions, and the series managing director will determine if the rear flashing light can be deactivated. One more portion here that I will read. It says that once under caution, pit road will be open. On the command of the NASCAR race control, upon the opening of pit road, vehicles may elect to pit and change tires, wet or dry, install wet weather condition equipment, and or perform any other permitted services, or remain on the track in their sole discretion. So there you have it right there. That's, as it says, per the NASCAR rulebook. And I want to go up, and it says, when NASCAR determines that conditions are too wet to continue under dry condition equipment, and that's the big caveat there. And in the broadcast, when this caution came out, I mean, you heard Larry Mack, Mike Joy, Jeff Gordon, and Clint Boyer, all of the above, discussing the track and saying how wet tires weren't necessarily going to do much because, you need significant precipitation on the track for those wet tires and for that tread to be able to function properly. Otherwise, your car will be at much of a disadvantage as opposed to slicks, obviously, on a dry surface. So teams came down pit road. No team changed their slicks for wets. And above all else, the rear flashing lights didn't have to be illuminated, and windshield wipers didn't have to be used. So if that right there in the rulebook says that the rear flashing lights must be activated during damp or wet conditions, which is why NASCAR threw the caution flag, because they deemed that the track was too wet to continue under dry condition equipment. So I think that right there just shows that maybe NASCAR was breaking their own rule. And who knows what the motive could have been. But I want to look at this now from this perspective and thinking about it, because we think back to last week and the absolute flop that the Daytona 500 did in ratings. Coming off of the worst viewed Daytona 500 in history. Started out pretty all right, but then we have a 6.5 hour rain delay, and then we got, what was it? Like, it was less than 4.5 million or so. It was something around there. Regardless, it was garbage. And so, did NASCAR feel compelled to possibly manipulate the ending of this finish to spike ratings? Because everything that I have just mentioned makes absolute no logical sense as to why they threw the caution as per the rulebook. So is this possibly a way at once again tampering with the sport and the product for entertainment purposes. This has been something that I've been talking about for a while. I know that I've just been started doing this podcast, but in previous projects that I've done and all that, this has been the one thing that I have been a stickler on NASCAR on, and one thing that grinds my gears to a whole nother level. And the reason being is because we are prioritizing entertainment over the actual product, and that's not the proper way this should be carried out. NASCAR is a sport of tradition. It's grassroots. It's all about that. And I don't know, man. It just feels so wrong under the assumption that this is, what has happened. We don't know that, and, it would be silly if it actually was, but it's kind of pointing to it in tampering with the actual product. It's just wrong. And, there are going to be boring races, right? We're going to have boring finishes. On the bright side, Chase Elliott was in the lead, his most popular driver, right? I just don't get why they felt the need to make this decision. And I understand that a lot of these decisions are split second, and, NASCAR fans and everybody else are longing for NASCAR to be more consistent in making these calls. But it's just frustrating having to continue to talk about this. But even after that, I started thinking about last year, and I was like, light bulb. Do you remember the race at Texas Motor Speedway last year in the playoffs, and talking about weather and NASCAR and maybe not using the rule book there as well? Because if you think back to that race at Texas last year, NASCAR refrained from throwing the caution flag for weather. It was obviously raining and covering the entire track surface. And then Kevin Harvick pancakes the wall, and, the rest is history. Doesn't make it to the championship four. It has a lot of point implications, playoff implications right there. So, what makes this scenario different from the race at Texas last year? Why couldn't they have thrown the caution for rain then? Why did they feel so compelled to do it now when they should have done it then? So it's putting it's putting all of those things together, and, makes you think. But regardless, it's frustrating. But, you're going to have these things, and, you're going to have these split decisions, and we do want them to be consistent. It's not a perfect world. It's not going to be, but it's just nothing seems to add up from making this decision to throw that caution. That's just me, and that's just based on all the evidence that I was able to gather, and kind of, let myself sit for a minute and think about it for a sec, because, it's something that I think we're going to continue to talk about, the idea of, entertainment over product. It's just we have to deal with these things. There's a way to connect with people and to draw them to this sport by not making a quote unquote boring finish, more action packed.